Welcome to Recalibrate Reality, the future of New York. Our guest today is Gary LaBarbera, the president of the New York City and the New York State Building and Construction Trades, one of New York's largest unions with over 200,000 workers in the construction industry. In this episode, we discuss how Gary and his members navigated COVID-19 and how they trained the next generation of workers, particularly from underserved areas, to create new pathways to the middle class. We'll also get Gary's take on some of the lessons learned from the most recent elections. And so now, let's recalibrate reality with Gary LaBarbera. Gary, welcome to Recalibrate Reality.
Hi, Scott. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Now, it's a thrill to have you on, and it's been great working with you for all these years. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to start sharing and getting some of your insights as to where the world's going. But before we jump into that discussion, I thought it'd be helpful for our viewers to get a little bit of your background and how you ended up today as the heads of the New York State Building Trades, what was sort of that route and what it's like to be there today.
Sure. Thank you, Scott. So, my story is, I guess, a very common story. I grew up in a very modest household. Both my mother and father lived through the Depression, and World War II, so they knew what challenge was. My brothers and I were raised with some very fundamental principles about how we conduct ourselves throughout our life, which were whatever you do to the best of your ability. Work hard, always be honest, and always keep your word. So I joined the Teamsters Union in 1981, February 2nd, 1981. Wow. I'll never forget the date. So it's over 40 years ago. And that was a pivotal moment in my life because I became a part of a union. My father before me was, after World War II, he joined the Teamsters Union in 1947. So I grew up, around the kitchen table, listening to many stories and the virtues of what, unions bring to the middle class. And so, when in my generation, people coming from the middle class, you always thought about a few options, right? You were either going to become a fireman, you're going to become a police officer, sanitation, or, get in the union, right? Because, you wanted that steady paycheck and you wanted that pension and the medical coverage. So, that was kind of my thought process. So I was, as I say, in 1981, it was a pivotal moment, a transition in my life where I got into a union and I'm making good family sustaining wages, and I had medical coverage. I just gotten married, working towards a retirement. In early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, I actually went back to school and went through the Cornell IRR Labor Studies program, which was, I think, very instrumental in preparing me for a leadership role. And then in 1994, I was brought on as a business agent for Local 282. This is Local 282 of the Teamsters, which is the construction union in New York City that delivers ready-mix concrete and building material supply to construction sites. And from there, 1994-95, I became the trustee president, business manager local, and I served in that capacity for 14 years. During that time, I was also elected in 2000 as the president of the Teamsters Joint Council, which represented about 50 unions and 120,000 Teamsters in New York City. And then in 2007, while serving in both those positions, I was elected as the president of the New York City Central Labor Council, which represented 400 unions and 1.4 million members in the city. And then in 2009, now I had three jobs. In 2009, my predecessor, Edwin Malloy, he had asked me if I would consider, heading the building trades. And at that moment in my life, I thought it was the right option for me, and I was honored to do so. So 2009, I became the president of the New York City Building Trades. And actually, just in January of 2021 is when I was elected as the president of the State Building Trades. So today, I currently serve as the president of the New York State Building Trades Council, as well as the New York City Building Trades Council, combined representing over 200,000 unionized construction workers in the state of New York. So I'm deeply honored to be in both those positions as the state and city president of the building trades. And I work hard every day. I do the best that I can do. I'm honest and I keep my word. So thanks, Dad.
It was good advice. And you talked about having to wear many hats, and one hat that I've seen personally up close is you also really being an advocate for the state and the city, right, and not just for your members, but for the long term vitality of our state and our region. And so as you've gone through this great history of the 40 years that you laid out, right? I mean, you lived through 9/11, we lived through Superstorm Sandy, you lived through a lot of other stuff along the way. 2020 hits and we have COVID, right? Which something obviously none of us could really have imagined. And so I'm curious, from your vantage point, with your historical perspective, your responsibility for your 200,000 members and your many partners that you have out there today. How did you respond? What was your initial reaction? And with all the noise about people are going to be leaving New York, fleeing New York, will New York survive? Did you in any time sort of doubt the long-term sustainability of New York? And what were the signals you were seeing from your members and your clients at that time?
We've been through many challenges in the city, and I think it's important that I note that I am very deeply concerned about the city of New York and the state of New York and the region, and there's a reason. The building trades unions rely on a strong and vibrant economy, as you know. If we don't have a safe, clean city, we don't have a city that welcomes business, puts the doormat out for business. We cannot grow as a city, and the building trades cannot survive as an institution. So we rely on New York's economy being robust and strong. I never doubted that New York City would come back because I've had the real privilege and the honor to work with people such as yourselves in the real estate community and in government, and know that there is such a deep commitment to this city. The reality is New York City, New York State, but in particular New York City, is a unique place. It's really, I think, the greatest city in the world. There is so much the city offers in terms of opportunity, in terms of culture, entertainment. It's just a great and vibrant city. And again, the economic opportunity, Wall Street, there's the economic engine of not only the city, but the country and the world. So I never really doubted that New York would come back. And another reason why, Scott, and you'll recall this as well, after the tragic events of 9/11, we responded, building trades members, thousands of them on that day and every day since then. When people were fleeing Lower Manhattan, we literally ran to Lower Manhattan to assist. And we assisted from the very moment that the towers came down through the cleanup and the rebuilding. We did all that, the building trades and union contractors. But I remember vividly so many people saying, Lower Manhattan is dead. Lower Manhattan is dead. It's never going to come back. It will never come back. And I remember when I saw and we began and the shovels went into the ground on the first tower, which was Silverstein's Tower 7, I said to myself, you can knock us down, but you can't keep us down. And you look at Lower Manhattan today. I mean, again, pre-pandemic, but you look at Lower Manhattan today, it's a thriving, vibrant place, and it will be a thriving, vibrant place. I know there's 2 more towers that are going to be built down there, and then the whole World Trade Center campus will be complete. And so, because we lived through that, we heard it. We'll never come back. Superstorm Sandy, same thing, 8 years ago. Devastation, and I recall, Mayor Bloomberg calling me on a Sunday morning saying, "Look, we need to have plumbers, fitters, carpenters, laborers. Can we marshal people tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. at Floyd Bennett Field? How many do you need?" He said, I need maybe 600, 1,200 showed up. And there was the same thought process. We'll never be able to rebuild. And we rebuilt. So my belief is the resiliency of New York City is unique. And this city is going to continue to grow and thrive. And that it needs to grow and thrive to really create the opportunity to lift people up, to create, a strong middle class, all of the indicators are pointing in a direction that New York City is going to come back, and we're going to continue to thrive, and it's going to continue to be the epicenter of not only the United States, but in my opinion, of the world, and the state as well. I mean, in other areas of the state, which I'm becoming more familiar with, we're really starting to see things rebound. So I'm very bullish on New York City and certainly New York State, and I believe the great opportunity lies ahead.
Yeah, and then I couldn't agree more with you. And I think it's interesting that when you talk about 9/11 and living through that experience and Superstorm Sandy, it embedded in our character as New Yorkers this sense of resiliency, the sense that we will overcome, and the sense of optimism that we're going to come together as a community and push forward and plan for that better and brighter day ahead. And I think it was interesting as the COVID crisis happened, it's almost like all of us who have watched or lived through those experiences immediately went into that crisis management mode and of we're going to find a way to beat it, right? And whether that was bending the curve and our healthcare heroes and our essential workers that kept things moving while that was going on was key. But the other key, as we've come to the later stage of this crisis, was the vaccinations, right? Which was that we've had this incredible scientific miracle happen faster than anyone could have anticipated it happening. Today, 87% of the adults in New York City are vaccinated, and I know that you and your union, like we did at RXR and our company, we mandated, got it done, and I know took a big push to get your members vaccinated. Talk about that, because that's been controversial, and so I can imagine some of your members felt that they didn't want to be forced to do it, but I'm curious to how you got them to do it.
I will tell you that the building trades leadership, you're right, we took a very strong position here. And our position was that we urged our members to be vaccinated. And there are certain agencies and some owners that have mandated that. For example, the School Construction Authority, you cannot work on a project unless you have a vaccine. The same thing, obviously, with health and hospitals, and we're doing a lot of work with health and hospitals right now. They have immunocompromised patients. We have workers that go in and work in the hospitals. And, you can't risk having someone having COVID. You have to be vaccinated. And many owners, private owners, who have a right to say, no, I want everyone vaccinated. And our position with our members, and by the way, we're over 80% right now vaccinated. And our position, and I give a lot of credit to the leadership with the members, was, listen, if there's a site that requires a mandate and you're not vaccinated, guess what? You're not going to work. And I think that was quite a incentive for many to go and get the vaccine.
And to that point, for us, for example, at RXR, we had a situation where about 40% of the trades that were working on our projects were vaccinated back in June, and we said, okay, by September, everyone's got to be vaccinated, and we started to do the donuts, coffee, education, vaccination on site. Right. And now we're 99%. Some of it was people swapped out people that were against it and brought people that weren't. But I think, this is, a carrot and stick approach that we need to take, because this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, and you see it. Right. And now, the more that we get people vaccinated, the more we can get back to beginning that recovery to the new normal as we described.
No question about it, Scott.
So I want to pivot to infrastructure. There's been a lot of projects, whether the airports, we had obviously Moynihan Station that was redeveloped and train hall redeveloped. There's now coming out of the federal government, right, the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, $550 billion of new spending. New York alone is going to get something like $170 billion of that infrastructure capital. From your vantage point, with all the private sector work going on, you have JP Morgan's headquarters, Google's headquarters, all the Hudson Yards, Grand Central, all this new activity, at the airport work being done. Now we bring on these new infrastructure projects. Do we have the manpower and the resources to actually execute on this front?
I give, again, a lot of credit to the trades and their training directors. They have recognized that with all of this additional work, we need to ramp up apprenticeship classes. And we really are focusing now on underserved communities. I'll tell you real quickly, if you don't mind. I mean, as part of the project labor agreements we negotiated in 2020 with the city of New York, we think that workforce development is a key to the future of our economy and a key to the future of rebuilding communities. So what we did is, and it was historic, the amount of capital expenditure, including what I just mentioned, the 8.7 for the borough-based jails, which are design built. It's almost $40 billion worth of construction activity over the next 4 years. It's enormous. And so what we did was we along with the city, we are focusing now on communities, and we're working with Cities Workforce One to go into communities, certain zip codes, where 15% or more of the population is under the federal poverty line. And this is in all 5 boroughs. Now, as part of these negotiations, this is really staggering. I had asked the city if they could produce a map for me during the negotiations, so I could just get a sense of, what are we talking about here? And I have to say that when you look at, again, this is all out of boroughs, it was a little over 50% of communities fell into that category. And the South Bronx being by far the worst, the most impoverished community of all of our communities in the 5 boroughs. So, I mean, there really is, institutional poverty. So we see all of this opportunity that's going to come with work as the future, as a way to really address those concerns, really to help people, lift people out of institutional poverty, lift people out of the dire struggle that they're in, and bring them up into the middle class. And we do this through our pre-apprentice and direct entry programs. Real quickly, we have 4 major programs we work with. One is the Edward J. Malloy Construction Skills Initiative, which really has been around for 2 decades. We brought thousands of people in. That's solely and primarily focused on high school students. We work with New York City vocational high schools. We have a program which is known as Pathways to Apprenticeship, which we focus on justice-involved individuals, which really gives them a second chance, at being a productive citizen. We have our Helmets to Hard Hats program, which is our veterans program, which again, we're very, very proud of. And we brought, well over 1,000 veterans in just in the last several years. And then finally, non-traditional employment for women, which is focused on bringing more women into the trades. So these are direct entry, pre-apprentice direct entry programs. And so we use these as a vehicle to kind of move people from these underserved communities to the head of the line, if you will, during recruitments, and they get placed into unions. The numbers are fantastic. Of all of these programs, 88% are some programs are 100% New York City residents, but combining more, 88% of members coming into the building trades now are New York City residents, which was always the historical criticism that most of the people in the New York City building trades didn't live in New York City. So that's changed dramatically. Of our apprentices, 69% of those apprentices are minorities. So 70% of people coming into trades are minorities. And as of 2017, which the numbers have gone up, the last time we actually studied it, 56% of all membership were minorities. So we're really seeing, lifting people up and really starting to expand diversity in the trades. And all this work opportunity is going to really be able to facilitate creating these opportunities for these underserved communities.
Yeah, that is terrific to hear, because I know when people think of labor, they historically have thought of almost a little bit like your story. There's the lineage of the father to the son, and there's been this sort of inability to actually attract the broader spectrum of New York, and particularly the underserved communities, minority communities, women, and I think attacking all that is critical. And listening to you speak about this, it makes me think about in this post-COVID world, we're probably going through the greatest transformation that we've gone through, and as a country, probably since World War II. And we've already pre-COVID, we're seeing this dislocation as technology was coming in, and that this inequality and inability for people to have that upward mobility that your father had and you were able to have in the middle class. So to be able to have programs like you described, are critical because you really need new playbooks and new plays
Right.
for this post-COVID world to get people into that middle class. And hopefully it doesn't end with the trades. This is something we should be thinking about for other types of industries that people don't necessarily have to go get 4-year degrees, that they can
Right.
learn a skill, put that skill to work, and become productive and have that a chance for upward mobility and have the same lifestyle and grow their family like you did.
I completely agree with you, Scott. I think it's a very good model.
So just we talked about a lot of construction, right? And one of the things that has always been a sticking point, and particularly in New York, is the cost of construction and public projects in particular. We have this reputation for being the most costly city to execute projects, even when we're doing able to sort of bring the budget to normal. We tend to be over budget and delayed along the way. And you've seen it at your time serving publicly, whether with the MTA, the Port Authority. I've seen it in my experiences of this. And one of the the byproducts of that is that with the public then doesn't want to vote to provide money for public projects anymore because they think it's going into a black hole versus actually creating an outcome. In your role and working with your colleagues, is there any thoughts that you have in terms of ways that we could ensure that we're not just reinvesting in our infrastructure, but we're reinventing how we invest in our infrastructure so that it is actually is something that people think that every dollar that they give is being spent wisely and efficiently and productively?
I do recall very vividly, there was that whole New York Times expose, right, on the MTA and some of the projects.
Yeah.
And it was very critical of the MTA and frankly of the construction industry as a whole. I think that was in a way kind of a wake-up call to agencies and authorities and to the industry. And I think that I know at the Port Authority where I serve as a commissioner, and then you did as well, and I know with your involvement in the MTA, we as an agency or an authority are more highly focused than ever before on essentially monitoring progress, monitoring budget as we go along. I think what really needs to happen, certainly in the public sector, is I think they need to take a page from the private sector. And what I think part of that problem, Scott, is that whether it's the MTA or the Port Authority, and I don't say this in a critical way, it's just from what I've learned from my experience, is these are very large bureaucracies. And what we see in bureaucracies, and frankly, we've seen it in state agencies and city agencies, is often there's this kind of siloed approach. And there's a lot of territorialism in each silo. And so I think it's a combination of things. I think that there needs to be more oversight on projects. There needs to be some more accountability, candidly. And when I say that, I don't just mean of contractors, I mean across the board. Cost is that's our major competitor, frankly, in the union market. We often say, and I've often said to the union leadership, when you go to negotiations and sit across the table from your contractor association, you're not really negotiating with your contractors. You're negotiating with the market, right? And that to me is a very fundamental business approach. And so, we have to understand and recognize that we have to bring value to a project. We have to bring speed and efficiency to a project. And we have to be able to deliver a project that's within budget. And, one of the things that we're having ongoing conversations with the real estate board is, look, we know, in the private sector, there's non-union competition out there. We have all recognized at this point, I mean, it took time, but it's, simply put, it's what I say, everybody, it's the math. But if the budget doesn't work, it makes it impossible. So we realize it's about the math. And so I give a lot of credit again to the leadership of the trades. They're coming up with very innovative ways to become more competitive, to become more efficient. And I think it's just the overall combination of things, Scott, that the industry is evolving. We need to evolve with the industry. And the other thing I will say is, I think one of the problems in the industry, candidly, is more transparency. I think we have to have a more transparent industry. When unions make adjustments, they do this within a collective bargaining relationship, but we don't really ever know, does the end user really get those savings? If you're building a project, is Scott Rechler getting those savings, or any developer? Are they actually, because we're not in the final negotiations, we don't have any place to be there legally. So again, I think transparency is important as well.
No, it's good to hear. And I think you used the word silos. And I think one of the things that I've seen in my experience is that it's not just silos internally in the bureaucracies, but how they approach each of the stakeholders, rather than approaching this as a partnership between the government, business, and labor, and saying, how do we come together and work to put the best project forward for the best price on time? It's a little bit of this person's, on the other team, that person on the other team, versus we're one team and we're going to get this done, right? And I think that would be, and the transparency would go a long way on that front. So we another area that you've referred to before is thinking about sustainability and renewable energy, and there's a lot of desire by the private sector, by the public sector, to focus on creating more sustainable buildings in terms of existing product as well as building new products. And so I'm curious, from your perspective and your vantage point, what initiatives are you doing? How are you partnering with the private sector, with government, to actually help move us forward to meet some of these new goals?
So this is again just a great topic, and it's something that really we and I have been very invested in, probably now for going on 3 years. And so just let me tell you where we're at with this whole renewable issue. First of all, we recognize that climate change is real. And we recognize that it has to be addressed, certainly for the future of our planet and for our kids and grandkids' future. I have now 5 grandchildren, and I look at these little guys and girls running around when they're all together, and I'm madly in love with each one of them. But I often think about, what will the world look like, in 20 or 30 years from now, right? What will the world look like? So I feel that our generation, we have a real responsibility to ensure that we turn to the next generation a better environment and a cleaner world. And certainly in New York State, we're now talking about how we reduce in the world, but certainly here in the state, there's been a lot of focus on the CLCPA, which is getting to certain benchmarks goals by 2030 and by 2040. And the focus right now has primarily been, on wind and solar, right? Now, this is the issue. What's very important here is just transition, right? Because you're going to be transitioning from a fossil fuel industry in terms of energy production to a new industry, solar, wind. I'm going to mention hydrogen and biofuel in a minute. So, there's going to be a shift in employment, and many of those jobs, in particular in New York State, are highly unionized jobs, good middle-class, family-sustaining jobs. So we've been working 3 years with NYSERDA, with the governor and now the new governor on this issue. And what we did was, we ensured, number one, that we got this codified into statute, that on large-scale renewables, 5 megawatts or more for solar and wind, onshore and offshore wind, solar, that there would be prevailing wage and PLA requirements, ensuring that these are going to be good middle-class jobs. We also got labor peace agreements for the permanent operation and maintenance jobs, an incentive to buy American, and an incentive for developers, offshore wind developers, to buy from New York facilities components. Now, the problem is this the chicken or the egg, right, or the cart before the horse? Where we stand now, I think we're challenged to meet the goals by 2030. We look at Local Law 97, it's not reality, because, and this, I'm sure, very well, and many of your listeners will know this very well. It's just not a reality. Now, we're talking about gas bans. The problem is, we're not going to have the renewable or zero net emissions available to meet some of the goals in 2 or 3 years under Local Law 97. It's not there. So I think it has to be phased in. And I think that wind and solar alone is not going to do it. I think we have to really focus on hydrogen, which is being used widely in Europe and in certain parts of the country on the West Coast, and biofuel, which are not necessarily renewable, but they're zero net emissions.
Right.
Because there's an enormous amount of pressure being put on, as you know, on building owners to get into compliance when there isn't the existing renewable or clean energy available. I've tried to use my voice to the extent I can and will continue, and I'm partnering with other individuals and organizations like Remney to try to raise the flag up, right, and say, wait a minute, we understand, your goals, and I appreciate the environmentalists, and I understand, but it isn't as simple as 2 years from now, everything's got to be a certain way in terms of renewable energy, because it's not going to be there. So I think that while it's very well intentioned, I think, people like myself and others in the real estate industry, and, we are doing that now, we really have to try to talk some common sense here, to the environmentalists. Again, we understand, we all agree climate change is real and we need to move away from fossil fuel and into renewable and clean energy. But we have to do it in a mature and intelligent way. And it is, again, it can't be ideology. It can't simply be ideology.
And it's very well said and thoughtful. And I think, for the viewers, right, Local Law 97 is a law that the city put in place that set guidelines as to greenhouse emissions that buildings have to get to in different periods, 2025, 2030. And I think the thing that your point is that's well taken is that we need a bridge, a rational bridge, to get to the point where we actually have renewable energy alternatives to do that. It doesn't mean we actually have to go, use the fossil fuel, but there's natural gas, there's other alternatives, there's other ways to get there, but we have to not let this be simply, we have to stop. And I think one of the things that people don't focus on is there's trade-offs, right? I mean, we've talked a lot about today about job opportunities, there's affordable housing, there's economic development, and when you think about having social impact and impacting people's lives, obviously having, an environmentally sustainable community is critical, but so is housing, so is jobs, so is healthcare. And you got to balance them all, because if you're just going to say we're going to stop building housing because we can't have enough energy, that's renewable energy, to do it, all of a sudden our housing crisis becomes this much worse, right? And so I think that this is more nuanced. And you use the word, that this can't just be ideological, right? And I think that's an important point generally, because I think over the last number of years, we've had these ideological positions taken by some elected officials that have taken very complex, nuanced issues like the ones we just were talking about and tried to simplify them into slogans and ideology rather than trying to, deal with the complexity in a way that addresses all of the issues. And the recent election that we just had over the last week, I think there was some pushback, and I kind of feel like that was a little bit of a pushback of, okay, it's, put aside the ideology in favor of tangible progress. We want to see results, let government do its job as we go forward. So I'm curious, you have in your membership, you have a broad base of ideology and different people from different backgrounds. When you hear from them, what do they expect out of government, A, and B, going into this environment right now for someone like Eric Adams, who's going to be our next mayor in New York City? What advice would you give him to guide through this specific period?
So in terms of our membership, I would say that our membership would be moderate to centrists. That is a fair assessment. Not all are Democrats, certainly not all are Democrats, but I would say the large majority of our membership is really in the center. And so when we see the type of gridlock that goes on, and one of the things that I think, to your point, what we saw on election day I think it's a referendum in a way that is very telling. I think when you realize that we have in the Democrats, and I'm a proud Democrat, have the executive, we have the Senate, and we have the House, and you look at the gridlock. What I refer to right now, what's happening in the Democratic Party with this, if you want to call it this, DSA or the far left, it's a cannibalization of the party. So our members get very frustrated because, and I think, that's why we saw what we saw, because we're saying, now, wait a minute, we worked so hard. We were told we need to support Democrats. We got to vote in our interests. We got to do all these things. We did all those things, and we're in gridlock. And when we saw just happen, when you think about, we mentioned in the earlier portion of the show, the infrastructure bill, and you think about that, if it weren't for 6 Republicans, this wouldn't have happened. And you think about in New York, where you had Congressmember Bowman vote no, and you had obviously AOC vote no, that was ideology. That was ideology. And I'm just going to have to say this while I have the opportunity, because I'm not ashamed to say what I'm going to say, because I've said it publicly and I'll continue to say it publicly. The far left or progressives are talking about bringing people out of institutional poverty. They're talking about we got to reduce crime, and we got to do things to reduce addiction, right? And the sense of hopelessness. We got to build communities, okay? The best way, and I will say this, Scott, I have said this for 30 years, from the very first day I became a labor leader in this city 30 years ago. I would say the best anti-crime and anti-poverty program is a job that leads to a career. And the reason is, and talking to so many different communities and stakeholders from these communities, all everyone wants, regardless of the color of their skin or their background, is they want to be able to have dignity and a sense of self-worth, right? And we all want the same thing. We want to have at least that middle-class existence, right? We want to be able to have a home. We want to be able to raise a family. We want to be able to provide for our family. When our kids are sick, we want to have a job and a career that we can take them to the doctors. And when we are done with our careers, we want to be able to retire with some level of dignity. We all want the same thing. Now, job creation is how we do that. When we saw the WPA with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that's why that program went into place. We saw the federal highway system with Eisenhower. That's why we saw that program went into place. And that's what we've just seen with the infrastructure bill. But the reality is that when you have people that say on one hand that they want to change this and help people in these blighted and disadvantaged communities, but then don't vote for job creation, that's the problem. That's a problem for our membership in the building trades, because that's what we solely focus on. We always say, vote in your interests. You got to vote that's going to create opportunity for us. So to answer that part of your question, that's the reaction. There's this sense of frustration, and I think we're seeing it beyond just union members. We're seeing it across the board. Democrats, a lot of Democrats stayed home, and I think a lot of Democrats are a little bit frustrated with the direction of the party, and that's why we saw what we saw on Election Day. Now, as far as Eric Adams goes, look, I think Eric's going to be a great mayor. We just 2 weeks ago, we had the opportunity to have him join our executive board for a Zoom. That's the last conversation, actually, in-person conversation I've had with him. Very excited about his thoughts for the future. One is he recognizes that the first and foremost, we need a safe, clean city. And again, that goes back to where we talked earlier about if we don't have that, nobody's going to come to work in New York City. Therefore, there's going to be no commercial development. We're not going to get, big institutional commercial clients to come here, because if people feel it's unsafe to come here, that's thwarts economic development. It thwarts construction. So I'm thrilled about that. But I think one of the things that I really like what he's saying, and I'm hopeful he's able to do it. He said, after the election, now we're going to take off the intramural jerseys and we're going to put on one jersey, Team New York. And he continues to say, he wants to bring all stakeholders in. He did say that to us as well. He wants to find a way to really bring people together in the interest of building back a better New York City. And my advice to him would be keep to your word. Like my dad said, keep your word and really endeavor to do that, because I think there are so many people in this city that are so hungry for that, Scott, that really want to work together and really want to put the city first. I think there's an enormous opportunity here for Eric Adams to really, really make a difference in New Yorkers' lives and the future of New York. So, if he can do what he says he's going to do, address the safety issues in the city, address the crime issue, and also bring so many stakeholders together, if he could stick true to his words, and I believe he will. I see him as fearless. I mean, he's very open about, the far left. He has said, and I mentioned this to him in my conversation, he sees himself as the face of the Democratic Party. And I think he's right. I think that the far left is the numerical minority. And I think when you looked at the primary, when you saw Catherine Garcia and Eric were so close, they were running on the same issues, right? We're going to have to address the safety issues in the city. We have to address crime. We're going to have to make sure it's a clean city. We got to put the welcome mat out for business. I mean, that's where we are today. So if he can follow through on those things, I think there's a lot of a bright future for the city of New York, and we're certainly going to support him. And we made it very clear to him that he can count on us in any way possible to work with him, especially in the workforce development side, and certainly on these other broader issues. I think we're very like-minded.
Yeah, and if you think about the last number of years, we've been told this is a tale of two cities, and rather than being united to solve the challenges that each part of the city was facing, whether that was equity or giving everyone the opportunity or education or housing, it was divisive. And to your point, that there's a thirst for us to come together as partners, as one New York, to overcome these challenges and a window of opportunity to reimagine the future of New York as a renaissance in a post-COVID world where we can all partner together, whether that's business, government, labor, civic groups, the charitable organizations, to say, how do we make it better for everyone? How do we create a more sustainable, more equitable, more prosperous community for everyone that lives to the standards that you set forth, which is that they can live with dignity and opportunity, they work hard, they can excel, take care of their families, and live a proud life in a great city. So I look forward to working with you, Gary, hand in hand on doing this as we have in the past. And I'm leaving this conversation more optimistic about what we have ahead of us in the days and months and years ahead. So thank you for taking the time, and thanks for all your leadership.
And Scott, thank you very much for having me and giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts. It was really a pleasure to be with you.
Great. Thanks, Gary. Be well. That concludes this week's episode of Recalibrate Reality. One of the biggest lessons that we've learned throughout this series is that we must put progress over ideology if we're to move forward in creating a region that's more prosperous and more sustainable than before. And we're fortunate to have Gary and his members more than ready to build the next version of New York and to train the next generation of workers. Thank you again to Gary LaBarbera and the New York Building and Construction Trades, and thank you to the Regional Plan Association, the 92nd Street Y, and to the team for making this week's episode possible. I'm Scott Rechler from 75 Rockefeller Plaza, New York. Have a great Thanksgiving, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.